Now, no program is perfect. There's a lot of things to love about Hyatt, such as their properties, their award chart, or just the consistency when it comes to their brands and their customer service. I've been a Globalist, which is Hyatt's top tier status, for the past few years, and I've had some absolutely wonderful stays at Hyatt hotels. I've stayed at Hyatt properties that are listed as being one of the top 50 hotels in the world, and I've been treated really well by the employees. I've been given different gifts and upgrades, regardless if I'm staying at either a low-end property or a high-end property. Being a globalist for the past few years while staying at Hyatt properties has been fantastic. But as good as it has been, Hyatt doesn't come without its flaws. The way you see people on the internet talk about Hyatt, you would think that Hyatt hotels are the only ones that people should focus on in the world of points and miles. But that really isn't the case. If you are someone who's been loyal to Hilton and you haven't really stayed at any Hyatt hotels, and you're wondering if you should jump ship from Hilton to stay at Hyatt properties, well, I would say get yourself some Hyatt points to have some Hyatt stays, but I wouldn't say to jump ship from Hilton to jump over to Hyatt because of the different challenges that come with the Hyatt program. My first biggest issue with Hyatt is going to be its limited footprint. Now, this is something that you may have heard other people complain about online, or you just noticed it when you were searching on Hyatt's website that there wasn't that many locations that you could choose when you were trying to travel to a new destination. The thing about Hyatt's footprint is that it is a lot smaller as compared to other hotel programs out there like Marriott, Hilton, Choice Hotels, or IHG. In fact, those programs have 4 times more properties than Hyatt hotels do. If you are loyal to Hyatt and get top tier status with Hyatt, you can get different benefits such as room upgrades, free breakfast, free parking, resort fees waived, access to some really nice club lounges to where some of them have so many food options that you can end up skipping a meal because of it. Well, to get all of these perks, you need to stay at a Hyatt property. So it becomes pretty annoying when you don't see any Hyatt properties as an option. But what annoys me the most about this is that how often people will end up skipping out on a trip just because they didn't see Hyatt as an option. They'll end up finding different flight award deals, and then when they try to figure out where they can stay at that destination, if they don't end up seeing any Hyatt hotels for options to be able to book, well then they might end up skipping out on that flight deal that they found because they can't figure out how they're going to be able to accommodate the cost of their lodging, which can end up being pretty expensive. But if you venture away from Hyatt hotels, you realize that there's a good chance that there ends up being other properties with other programs that you could take advantage of if you did actually want to travel to that destination because of the flight deal that you're able to find. Sure, there'll end up being times where you do travel to a place specifically for the property, but I think that for most trips, people are traveling to a place because they want to go see that destination, either because they want to explore it and it's a new place, or because they've been there before and they love it and they want to try to relive some of those memories. The points and miles community is constantly looking for the best deals, and Hyatt typically offers the best deals when it comes to redeeming points for hotel stays. But if a Hyatt hotel doesn't exist at the destination that you want to travel to, or is far away from where you wish to explore, then you have to look at other options out there. The reason why I know that people think this way is because for a brief moment, I almost didn't take a trip because I couldn't find a Hyatt property that I wanted to stay at. Now, it was a very brief moment, but I found business class flights from LA over to Fiji, and I didn't know much about Fiji, but I thought it would end up being a cool place to explore. And then after booking that limited business class award availability, I started looking to see what Hyatt properties were over in Fiji. And at the time, before I ended up taking this trip, Hyatt was still partnered with Small Luxury Hotels of the World, and they were the only option at the time to be able to stay redeeming Hyatt points in Fiji. And the property that was available, while it did look really nice, it was 3 hours away from the main airport in Fiji. So I would have had to fly into Nadi, Fiji, and then either take a 3-hour car ride or find another flight to the other side of the island just to be able to stay at this Hyatt partner property. I wasn't about to do all of that. This is way more of a hassle than I wanted for my trip. So I quickly went over to the Hilton app and saw that there was multiple Hilton resorts only 20 minutes away from Nadi Airport. And the Hilton property that I stayed at was pretty nice. And although it was torrential raining like the entire time I was there, due to the fact that I went during the rainy season, I still had a blast in Fiji and learned that the Fijian people are literally the happiest and nicest people that I've ever met in the entire world. Now, I know that some people are probably thinking, well, obviously if Hyatt is an inconvenient location, then just choose a different hotel program that is easier to explore that destination. And that's exactly what I did, but you'd be surprised at how many people navigate their entire trips based off of whether or not there is a Hyatt property to be able to stay at. there's probably some people who actually did go over to Fiji and took that 6-hour round trip drive just because that was a property that was partnered with Hyatt at the time. Listen, I am all about getting the good deals. I preach that here on this channel and also teach how to find them in my course, Points Travel 101. Check it out. But sometimes the deals aren't there. And when the deals aren't there, you have to do the best with what's still available. While I didn't end up getting really good value for my Hilton points staying at that property in Fiji, I still had a wonderful time at that property and it was super convenient when it comes to location. So for any people who love Hyatt, if the deal isn't there, don't avoid the location. Last year I went to Paris, and when I booked my flight to get over to Paris, I realized that the hotel with Hyatt that I wanted to book didn't have any award availability for me to be able to book it. Now I could have been able to book it for cash, which would end up being close to like 400 euros a night, which is something that I didn't want to spend. So what I decided to do was see what other hotel options were around. Now I did eventually end up booking that Hyatt Regency in Paris because award availability eventually opened up. But at the time I was perfectly prepared to stay at a different property if the availability with Hyatt didn't end up becoming available. The whole point I'm trying to get at here is that the small footprint with Hyatt is an issue. And the loss of small luxury hotels making Hyatt's footprint even smaller has made it an even bigger issue. Now, after Hyatt cut ties with small luxury hotels of the world, they purchased the booking platform Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And this comes to my second biggest issue with Hyatt, and that's going to be the acquisition and integration of Mr. and Mrs. Smith properties. I want to start off by saying that I don't know if I've ever stayed at a Mr. and Mrs. Smith property, but from what I've seen online, these properties actually look pretty nice. In fact, some of the Mr. and Mrs. Smith properties are also part of small luxury hotels of the world, which means that the same property can be booked on Mr. and Mrs. Smith's website and also small luxury hotels of the world's website. So the issue that I have with them isn't with the properties themselves. The issue that I have with them comes down to the value that you get when you're redeeming your Hyatt points to stay at a Mr. and Mrs. Smith property. Hyatt points are some of the more valuable points in the game. And they're one of the only hotel points that it makes sense to grab your transferable currencies and transfer over to at a 1-to-1 ratio. One of the best things about Hyatt is that they have an award chart. But unfortunately, when you are redeeming your Hyatt points with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it doesn't go off an award chart. It goes off of dynamic pricing. And what's even worse than it just being dynamic pricing is going to be the value that they put your points at when you are redeeming with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Because a lot of the properties, you're going to be redeeming your World of Hyatt points with them for under a penny each point. This is really low value for your Hyatt points. I mean, typically when you are redeeming your Hyatt points, you're aiming to get yourself 2 cents per point or better. But when you are going to be redeeming them with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you're not going to be getting anywhere close to that. So because of this, it doesn't make any sense to redeem your World of Hyatt points with Mr. and Mrs. Smith or to transfer any of your transferable currencies over to your World of Hyatt account to stay with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. If you're getting under a penny a point and you're redeeming transferable currencies, it makes more sense to cash out that transferable currency and then just use that cash to stay at that property. Because with a cash booking, you're also going to be earning points. So if you are transferring your points over to your World of Hyatt account to then redeem for Mr. and Mrs. Smith property, this just ends up being an absolutely terrible deal for you. Listen, the partnership with small luxury hotels of the world wasn't perfect with Hyatt, but it was 10 times better than what Hyatt is getting now with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Because at least there are options that could make a lot of sense to redeem your World of Hyatt points with to actually stay at small luxury hotels of the world properties. But there's almost no instance where it'll make sense to redeem your World of Hyatt points to stay at a Mr. and Mrs. Smith property. So it's almost like Hyatt lost all the small luxury hotels of the world properties and gained nothing that you're going to want to book unless you want to get yourself a terrible deal. So that small footprint that Hyatt had, which was my #1 issue, has become even smaller. I mean, Hyatt is pretty much banking on us not paying attention, because there's really no instance where it's going to make sense to make a Mr. and Mrs. Smith booking with your points, unless you want to trade a quarter for 2 nickels. And if you're wondering really how bad is this deal, here's an example of a property that is both connected with small luxury hotels of the world and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Now, after Hyatt lost the partnership with small luxury hotels of the world, Hilton decided to partner with them, and for many small luxury hotels of the world properties, you can redeem your Hilton points to be able to stay at that location. And because of this, when you can find a property that is partnered with both small luxury hotels of the world and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you can compare the pricing with both Hilton and Hyatt to see which one is giving you a better deal. On the screen is a property in Thailand that is partnered with both small luxury hotels of the world and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I looked for award availability for about a month away from the time that I am recording this and found multiple days available where it would end up being about $400 a night to be able to stay at this property. When redeeming Hyatt points to stay at this property, it would cost 51,500 Hyatt points, which is under 1 cent a point, so a horrible deal. But if you want to redeem your Hilton points, it would only end up costing 30,000 Hilton points for the exact same stay. Hilton is a transfer partner of American Express, and they have a transfer ratio of giving you 2 Hilton Honors points for every 1 American Express membership rewards points. So it could make sense to transfer over your membership rewards points to your Hilton Honors account if you didn't want to stay at this property. But it would never make sense to transfer over your Chase Ultimate Rewards points to your Hyatt account to be able to stay at this exact same property. I mean, this shouldn't happen with Hyatt. When you look at most blogs, you see them put the value of Hyatt points as being close to about 2 cents per point. And with Hilton, it usually ends up being near about a half a cent each. Yet when you are looking to book a hotel that both of these programs are connected to, Hyatt is charging almost double the amount of points to be able to stay at the exact same property. It seems odd. I guess it happens with flights, but it just is sad to see with Hyatt. I mean, I stayed at some really cool Hyatt properties, like the Andaz in London, I stayed at the Thompson Hotel in Madrid, and the Park Hyatt in Kyoto. And all 3 of these properties that I stayed at, they charged me less than 40,000 points a night. Yet this hotel in Thailand that ends up being under $400 a night is going to be charging me 51,500 points. What honestly annoys me the most about Mr. and Mrs. Smith is how much their properties flood their app or website when you're looking for properties in an area that you wish to travel to. Because you'll look at an area and you'll go, oh wow, there's 30 different Hyatt hotels that I can book in this area. But then after you start to click on the different properties, you realize that 26 or 27 of them are Mr. and Mrs. Smith properties. They're gonna end up being just horrible redemptions. And there isn't just a button you can click to avoid seeing all the Mr. and Mrs. Smith properties, but instead you have to click on seeing all the other properties, and then that way it ends up not showing you Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But this becomes incredibly annoying every single time you wanna search a different area to see what properties are available. I could rant about Mr. and Mrs. Smith properties for 2 hours, so I'm just gonna leave it at this. Do the best you can to avoid staying at Mr. and Mrs. Smith properties. Not only because you're gonna end up getting yourself a terrible redemption value when you are redeeming your points to stay there, but also if we all avoid staying with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Hyatt will end up noticing that and hopefully make changes to where it can make sense for us to get ourselves at least a reasonable deal to be able to stay at those properties. And that brings me to my 3rd issue with Hyatt, which is not being able to redeem points and awards. Now, Hyatt is really good when it comes to giving you low-cost bookings to be able to book properties that aren't Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And also, Hyatt is very generous when it comes to the different awards that they give you when you are climbing up their milestone ladder. But the thing that ends up happening with redeeming your points and awards is that you need to be able to find availability to be able to do that. And unfortunately, sometimes it can end up being challenging to make this happen. Now, I get that Hyatt can't release all of their rooms at the super cheap cost because then they would end up losing a ton of money. But what I have noticed is that there are different hotels within the Hyatt program who are playing games to make it so that there isn't any award availability because they're hoping that they can end up getting cash bookings as compared to the award bookings. When they end up getting the award bookings, while the hotels do end up getting paid, unless the hotel is very close to capacity, they typically don't end up getting that much money when people are redeeming their points to stay there. So because of this, some hotels will play tricks to make sure that award availability never comes up at all. And what makes this even more challenging is that while many of Hyatt's awards are great, they can end up making them hard to redeem. Like the category 1 to 7 certificate that Hyatt gives you when you end up reaching 60 elite nights, you only get 6 months from the time you receive it to be able to book the hotel and stay at the hotel. That is a very limited amount of time that I don't think any other hotel program does when it comes to free night award certificates. This means that if you become a Globalist in December, well, you have till June to book and stay at the category 1 to 7 hotel property. When you get one of these awards, although it can work at categories 1, 2, 3, and 4, you're gonna wanna use it at a top tier property so you can end up getting good value for the award. So you're probably gonna end up looking at category 7 and 6 properties, which if you only have 6 months to be able to book them, many of them are already booked up 6 months in advance because when you end up becoming a Globalist in either December or November, which I imagine is when most people do, that means that you're gonna have to redeem the certificate for spring. You could redeem it for winter, but the winter months are so close to when you are receiving the certificate that I imagine that it may end up being challenging for most people to already plan out a new trip that close to when you are receiving it. So most people are probably looking at like springtime, and when you end up looking at these category 6 and 7 properties, They're going to end up being booked up in springtime because these end up being higher end properties that people are going to want to go to when the weather is nice. If I had a full year to use it, similar to like the free night award certificate given by Hilton, well, that'd be fantastic. But 6 months is challenging. The first time I got it, I redeemed it for the Park Hyatt in Tokyo, and I think that the only reason why I was able to get award availability at the time that I wanted to travel there was because Japan wasn't even open at the time that I made the award booking. And I was really banking on Japan opening up its borders by the time I ended up taking this trip. And fortunately they did. But last year when I got this free night award certificate, I didn't even end up using it because all the properties that I looked at to try to use it at were not available. Most category 6 and 7 properties are not these huge, massive properties. There are a few of them that are. Most of them end up being limited properties because they are super high end, so they're trying to give you the best type of service that they can. So when that ends up happening, that means that there's going to end up being less award rooms that are available, which makes it so that there are less abilities to be able to use this category 1-7 certificate. Fortunately, Hyatt did give me 20,000 points in place of the free night award certificate. I don't know if they would even give me that option again coming up this year, but I have another one currently in my account, and I have no idea where I'm going to use it at. I mean, it's not like there's nowhere I can use it at. Could I use it at a category 3 airport hotel? Sure. But when you end up getting this category 1-7 free night award certificate, you do want to end up making sure you're going to get yourself good value for that redemption. Now, the Suite Upgrade award certificates are actually my favorite with Hyatt. I love the kind of rooms you can end up booking when you are redeeming these certificates. And what I have noticed is that usually my first couple of these certificates end up giving me some awesome stays at properties that I want to go to. But then the other certificates that I have, while I do end up using them, they don't end up typically being at the properties that I wish that I could have used them at because they didn't have any standard suites that were available. So while there may end up being properties that I would have loved to use that for like a 4 or 5 night stay, I end up using it at a different property where I only had a 2-night stay at. I imagine that there's a lot of elite members who come across the same exact problem, and there's also probably people who just have the World of Hyatt credit card who have issues when it comes to redeeming that category 1-4 free night award certificate. And that brings me to my fourth and final big issue with Hyatt, and that is the yearly devaluation to their program. Now, what I'm calling devaluations, Hyatt may not call it that. Hyatt will say that they're making changes to their properties when it comes to the categories that they're in. And they have done this for the last few years in the month of March. So what will end up happening is that some of the properties will go down in category, but more properties tend to go up, and usually the properties that you want to stay at are going to be the ones that are going to be moving up in category. I get that inflation is happening, and everything is becoming more expensive. But it feels like with Hyatt, they're becoming a lot more expensive faster than the other hotel programs out there. I mean, if you look at something like Hilton, they have actually improved since a year ago. But this is where that free night award certificate comes into play because every single year when they are making these changes, they move many of the category 4 properties into being a category 5, making them out of play to be able to redeem the certificate with, since with Hyatt, you can't top off points to be able to make an award booking with a certificate. I'm pretty sure that last year, all my category 1-4 free night award certificates were redeemed at properties that were below category 4. Now, these weren't bad properties that I redeemed them at, but it just goes to show you that Hyatt is trying really hard to limit you getting good value when you are redeeming the certificate. And the same thing can be said for the category 1-7 free night award certificate. Like I said to you before, I didn't even use it last year because it was just too difficult to find a place where I could get myself good value when I was redeeming that certificate. Now, were there properties that I want to use it at that used to be a category 7, like the Park Hyatt Verdun out in Paris? Yes, but now that property is a category 8, so I no longer have the ability to be able to use that certificate to be able to stay there. I really wish that Hyatt would change its category 1-7 free night award certificate to being way more like Hilton's, because it used to feel a lot more like that when they only had small luxury hotels of the world in category 8, but now they put a lot of their top properties in category 8, putting them just out of reach for me to be able to redeem my certificate with. I'm really hoping that the devaluations that Hyatt's probably gonna end up doing again in March this year aren't gonna be that bad. But something tells me that Hyatt's gonna continue this trend to where the properties that you'd like to stay at are just gonna end up moving up in category. There are some properties that I stayed at a couple of years ago that are more than twice the amount of points now as compared to what they were just 2 years ago. That is high amount inflation when it comes to points. But those are my 4 biggest issues with Hyatt. Now, I still think that Hyatt is a great program, and I have another video on this channel that I just made that goes over all the things that I love about Hyatt. So check that video out. But when it comes to their small footprint, their terrible acquisition of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the difficulty to redeem their points, and also the different awards that you get with them. And then on top of that, the yearly devaluations. This has just left a bad taste in the mouth of their loyal customers. Maybe Hyatt will make changes to these 4 issues, but if they continue down the path they've been going, which something tells me that they will, then what's gonna end up happening is Hyatt's gonna end up having loyal customers like myself ask the question, what other hotel options are there? But hopefully you enjoy this video. Let me know in the comment section down below, what is your biggest issue with Hyatt? Now, if you happen to have any questions about Hyatt, you can drop that down in the comment section down below. I'll do the best I can to answer it. And if you happen to be interested in any cards, check out my links in the description box to learn more. If you do decide to use any of my links, it does really help out the channel, and I'll be incredibly thankful for your support. If you want to become a points and miles booking expert, go to Points Travel 101 to purchase my course. After you end up going through my course, you no longer will be scared of making award bookings, and you'll be able to confidently book business and first class flights. And if you happen to really like this video, do me a favor. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this video, and have a beautiful rest of your day.